What is up? Welcome to, there we go. It's early morning here. What's up? Welcome to week 2 of the NFL Football Flowchart show on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. We're brought to you by DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the app now and use code SGP. New customers can score $200 in bonus bets instantly when they bet just $5 on football. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code SGP. What is going on, everybody? It is bright and early in the morning. I'm actually surprised that there's even people watching this, but we are on location here in Dallas, in Arlington, ready to see the Cowboys take on the Jets tomorrow. So when you do that, you got to find a room in the Airbnb and make the live stream happen. So we are doing it right now, and I think we will kind of cut right to the chase and just jump into it. So I'm going to share the screen here. We'll start with the cash game flowchart like we'll do every week. What's up, Eric? Giving me some love this morning in the chat. Giving me some, I don't even have coffee in me yet. It's 7:30 a.m. Couldn't figure out how to make coffee in Airbnb, but we are rolling. So let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Okay, that doesn't work too well. Okay, cool. So we'll dive into it. So flowchart here, we are, let me try to make this. Can I do this better? Sorry, this is great. Okay, so cash game lineups this week. I think the title of the podcast here is the cheap running back decision, and I think that is really what it boils down to this week. We've got a couple of different injury situations that have bubbled up, and we've got Joshua Kelly, right, with Austin Eckler going to be doubtful and likely not play. He didn't travel with the team, so he's basically out. So Joshua Kelly bubbles up as a really good play. We've also got Aaron Jones, who has not practiced yet this week and is questionable. So A.J. Dillon is a really good play as well. And then we've got David Montgomery, who doesn't really open up anything from an injury standpoint, but he is 5,800 as well and facing a Seattle Seahawks defense who the Lions have just run all over in their last 2 matchups with them. And then the last person that's worth talking about from a cheap running back situation is Rachaad White, who is getting a little bit overlooked, I think, this week. And just because he didn't have the greatest game ever last week, but he did have really good usage and was a very promising start for the second year back in the Tampa Bay offense. So all those guys are in the 5,000 range. Kelly being the cheapest at $5,000, then the other guys up at 5,500, 5,800, things like that. And so understanding and kind of deciding if we're going to want to play 2 of those guys, 3 of those guys, stuff like that is really, I think, what starts the decision points this week for cash. And so starting with our cash game core in column number 1, we've got Joshua Kelly in there. I'm fitting him in there as my locked-in back, $5,000. I think people may be nervous about the matchup with the Titans, saying that they have a good run defense, stuff like that. I don't really care too much. Just at the $5,000 price tag, he's going to get some good volume. He already had a pretty good week last week with Eckler playing, so I expect that he's going to be just fine this week. And then David Montgomery makes up the second piece of the cash game core, 5,800. I think that projection-wise, he is a couple points ahead of some of the other backs in this range, and I think that he has a lot of potential here against the Seahawks. I think this game is probably going to be a shootout, and so, of course, there's some risk here of, Jahmyr Gibbs taking some touchdowns and things like that, but I think for the most part, Montgomery is going to do pretty well and isn't too big of a risk at 5,800. Then we add our first wide receiver to the flowchart, and that's Calvin Ridley on the Jags, 7,200 this week. Obviously, he had really great usage in week 1. Got targeted all over the field in the first half, and that continued it a little bit into the second half as well. And I think at 7,200, that's probably couple $100 too cheap for Ridley still. He's probably going to continue to rise up if he has another big game this week against the Chiefs, another game that should be kind of an offensive shootout. So, yeah, I think Ridley could definitely should definitely be a pretty solid cash game play this week. And then lastly, for the core, the first column for the core would be Luke Musgrave, tight end for the Packers, 3,200. His price point didn't really move too much, maybe $300. And of course, he didn't have a huge game, but he was close to having a huge game. He caught a 45, 50-yard pass that he kind of got tripped up on, trailing back to the ball to track it. And if he doesn't get tripped up, that 50-yard pass is actually a 60-yard touchdown. And we're probably talking about him maybe a little bit even differently this week. So yeah, Luke Musgrave there is kind of my preferred guy at tight end this week at 3,200. I think it's worth making a savings there. The really only other option at tight end, in my opinion, would be Travis Kelce all the way at the top. I think he's at Travis Kelce's at 7,600 this week. But obviously that's a difference of 4,500 or so. So a lot of things to take into account there. So that's the core: Kelly, Montgomery, Ridley, Musgrave. I want to for sure start my lineups with them in cash. And then from there, it's a decision point again this week, similar to what we had last week, I think, between Anthony Richardson and Josh Allen. And what can you do with that $1,600 that you can save between the two of them? Obviously, Allen, not a great week one, quite a few picks, didn't, and then ended up losing to the Zach Wilson-led Jets. But he's coming into a Raiders defense here that should be pretty soft in the secondary, and we would expect Allen to be able to bounce back and post pretty elite numbers. And then on the other hand, Anthony Richardson had a really solid week one for the rookie. I think he met or exceeded expectations for most people who were trying to figure out what Richardson was going to be this year. And I think he was, he got pulled at the very end of the game just because they were kind of being cautious with the injury. But he could have had another 1-yard rushing touchdown that really would have popped his day over the edge a little bit. So, anyways, that's kind of the decision point there. I think there's potentially some other quarterbacks that you could think about if you don't want to do Anthony Richardson. I think Daniel Jones is a decent option for $300 cheaper than Richardson. And then Geno Smith would be another person that I wouldn't hate too much to put in there. But because those guys both had pretty tough week ones, I don't feel as solid playing them in cash this week. However, if you do look at, basically what they did over the last year or so, there really shouldn't be too much concern to fire those guys up at those prices. So basically, making this decision between Josh Allen and Anthony Richardson then helps figure out what level we can go to from a price point standpoint in our final column. So I'll circle back to that once I go through column number 3 here. So in column number 3, we've basically got our defense and our low price wide receiver that we're going to want to choose here. And so on the Anthony Richardson side, on the Anthony Richardson side, I put the Buccaneers defense up at the top, 3,200. They're one of the more expensive defenses this week, but you can actually kind of make it work and fit them in cash. I do think they are going to be relatively popular this week against the Bears, because the Bears just did not look that good against the Packers last week. And then on the cheap side of things, we've got the Titans, who are up against the Chargers. And I think that is more so just a game, kind of a bet on a lot of passing volume, just hoping we can get home with some sacks, just hoping maybe Herbert throws an interception or two. Not really a bet on, hey, the Titans are gonna win the game or shut out the Chargers or things like that. I think a lot of times when people think about defenses, they think about we need to try to target the teams that are gonna hold the other team to the fewest amount of points, which is good in theory, but it's really hard to project, really hard to actually predict when that's going to happen. And most of the defensive points actually come from sacks, turnovers, things like that. And so the more passing volume that we can target, sometimes the better the defensive play is, if that QB does end up making a couple of mistakes. So yeah, it's kind of the two decisions there at defense. I mean, you could also, depending on how things shake out with your, with your cash lineup, I wouldn't be too dead set on the Titans defense. Like, I have no problem going all the way down to the Raiders. I have no problem going to the Cardinals against the Giants for $200 more. Just kind of moving things around to try to figure out how it all works. And I know one of the questions might be, well, what can I play Josh Allen, quarterback, against the Raiders defense? And I think that's totally viable in cash, and not really too big of a deal at all. I mean, again, we're not looking for these defenses to shut up the other team out. We're looking for them to score some points off sacks and turnovers. And we saw Josh Allen have, I think, 3 or 4 picks last week. So we definitely know that's in the range of outcomes. So anyways, moving on to receivers. So I think there's 3 low-price receivers this week that are worth considering. One is a little bit more expensive than the other 2, and that's Puka Nacua, wide receiver for the Rams at $4,900. I think he's got a great target for that he showed in week 1 as a rookie. Over 100 yards, I think double-digit targets, and really seems to be a really safe option there, and DraftKings priced him up accordingly this week. And so he did have a little bit of an injury pop up during practice this week, but I think all systems are pointing to go on him. So yeah, I think Puka would probably be my favorite of these guys from a floor standpoint, but then it's just figuring out how you can kind of get it to work with your lineup based on some of the other decision points. And then the other 2 guys I'm considering would be Jaden Reed and Josh Reynolds. Reynolds is $3,700 for the Lions and Jaden Reed $3,400 for the Packers. And I think both of these guys had a pretty decent week 1. Reynolds actually played well on Thursday night, was in my Thursday Night Football write-up last week, and he did well. And then Jaden Reed, played well against the Bears last week. Did leave the game a little bit with some cramping, and so that kind of may have led to a lower, stat line than maybe we were hoping. But all things considered, at a $3,000 price tag, I think, last week, and he did just fine. And so I think both of them are good options again this week. I would probably slightly prefer Reynolds over Reed, but just because of the matchup, I think the matchup with Seahawks is much better, and it's going to be a little bit more higher scoring. But if you need to save the 300, I think Reed is a viable option as well. Okay, so that sets the table. That gets us basically through our first 7 picks of the flowchart. You're making a decision on Josh Allen versus Anthony Richardson. You're making a decision at cheap wide receiver, Puka Nacua, Jaden Reed, Josh Reynolds, and then you're making a decision at defense, Titans versus Bucks, and you're pairing that up with our cash game core of Josh Kelly, David Montgomery, Calvin Ridley, and Luke Musgrave. So now to fill in the gaps at the end, this is kind of the last column here where we want to choose 2 of these guys. So if you go the Josh Allen route, you're likely going to need to go the cheap defense route as well. So the Titans, if you don't want to do Titans, Raiders, save a couple $100 as well. And then you can fit Deebo Samuel or AJ Dillon in at like the 5,600, 5,900 range. I probably prefer Dillon to Samuel in this situation, just because I feel like Samuel doesn't have as safe of a floor usually on a week-to-week basis. He does have a really high ceiling, which is something that is worth considering in cash. If players have similar floors, we want to kind of think about the ceiling. In this case, I probably prefer Dillon, but Samuel does make some things work with the extra $300 savings. And then you should be able to pair them with Devontae Adams, 7,600. Depending what you decide at cheap wide receiver, you could also potentially squeak in Jamar Chase as well, 7,900. And so that's kind of the route there with Allen. With Anthony Richardson, you can get a little bit more creative. You could potentially get up to Christian McCaffrey at 8,900. And you should be able to fit 2 of the stud receivers as well, Jamar Chase and Devontae Adams. So I think that kind of really, circles back to the QB question mark, right? Is if you pick Richardson, you've got a little bit more ability to fit some of the studs, versus if you pick Josh Allen, then you're going to have to play probably Debo or AJ Dillon there to kind of fill things in. So anyways, I think that kind of summarizes the cash game chart. I did want to talk through a couple things from last week, right? So I think we were directionally correct on a few things last week, and then there was definitely some cash winning lineups out of the flow chart. I personally did not get over the cash line with my lineup, and I wanted to talk through, that decision point of me getting off of Tyreek Hill, which obviously after a 47-point outing or whatever it is, will basically put me out of the running to get over to the cash line. But we were talking about how it was smart to play the Commanders if they were going to be 65, 70%. It was smart to play Isaiah Likely if he was going to be 50%, just because you didn't want to take on that added risk of fading a guy and having him go off and then trying to make it up elsewhere. It just doesn't really matter that much when the percentages are so high on weeks. And I failed to realize how steamed up Tyreek Hill would be, how popular he would be. I should have probably had a better lay of the land on that as it related to that game being a really high scoring game and a high targeted game. But I kind of thought Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and Tyreek Hill were all going to be relatively close. And so I was saving some money going down to Jamar Chase off of Hill, and that just didn't work, and it proved to be the downfall. But it did not play out how I thought either. Tyreek Hill was much higher owned than the other two guys, and at that point, I should have kind of locked that in a little bit better and realized that I need to make Hill a priority if he's going to be so highly owned in cash. So I think that's something important to think through moving forward is, what players are going to be the high owned guys, the really high owned guys, the 50% guys, the 40% guys, stuff like that, that if you fade them, it really could end your day, and trying to figure out what our stances are on those. Take a little pause here. Football is back in full swing with another week of epic games, and who's got you covered on the action for every single one of them? DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. New customers can bet $5 on football and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Nobody's missing out on action this season. All DraftKings customers can take advantage of 2 new offers every game day this September. Get in on the NFL Week 2 action with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the app now and use code SGP to sign up. New customers can bet just $5 and take home $200 instantly in bonus bets. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code SGP. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details and state-specific responsible gambling resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. All right, let's pop open the GPP flowchart here, and we'll talk through that one for the week. So I think this is a really fun GPP week because I think I think the ownership is going to be really spread out, and I maybe didn't tie the bow that well on the end of the cash discussion there, but I don't think there's going to be Josh Kelly I could see being really high owned, maybe Calvin Ridley just because he's kind of a no-brainer at that price point, 7,200. But other than that, I think there's a lot of micro decisions and a lot of micro takes that are going to be needing to be made this week. And so I don't really envision I don't envision there being as much bubbling up and as many guys that are so high owned. And so in that case, you don't really need to worry too much about okay, if I fade this guy and 50% of the field has them, then what happens? In that case, you just kind of need to worry about what your takes are, what your who you're going to be more confident in playing, whose floor you like the best, whatever, and that's kind of how it goes there. So parlaying that over to the GPP side, I really think there's quite a few game options that are really fun to target this week, and so you'll see how I kind of try to fit these into some of the secondary stacks. But starting out of the gate, we're starting our game stack here, and this week's flowchart is a little bit different. It's just 3 columns, and it's got quite a few more options than usual, but that should be good if you're trying to create a couple different lineups. I want to try to have some exposure to some of these game environments. So starting with the game stack, and it's going to be a Chargers Titans game stack. And now, we saw the Chargers run the ball a ton last week, right, against the Dolphins, and that's just kind of because the Dolphins are giving them that. Eckler obviously had a great game. Josh Kelly had, I think, over 90 yards last week, as his typical standard backup role. And there's just a ton of plays going on in that game. There's a ton of plays called. And so I'm not too worried about the running, how much the Chargers ran last week. One, because no Austin Eckler this week. And two, I just think that was what kind of Miami was giving them. And so talking about what Tennessee is going to be giving them, Tennessee is a known pass funnel. They started out, all of last year, they were a huge pass funnel defense, basically, willing the teams to pass against them, and a lot of teams did that well. This year, in week one, Derek Carr had like 400 air yards, which is like pretty non-Derek Carr-ish. So when I was going through my workload report this week and looking at some of the underlying stats for air yards, I noticed that all of the Saints receivers just had a ton of air yards, and I was like, okay, well, that seems like that should translate pretty well here to Justin Herbert, who's obviously a much more competent and skilled quarterback than Derek Carr. So Justin Herbert and Mike Williams is actually the guy that I want to get into every lineup. Mike Williams, 5,700. Pretty quiet week one, but I think nothing has much changed since the preseason hype about him, and I think he shouldn't be 1,400 lower than Keenan. Let's put it that way. I think he could be in store for a pretty big week, and he will be not very owned. And then we've got the two different options, right? And so we'll look at costs on both of these and try to pair things up together in order to kind of sync things up from a cost standpoint. But if you do go with Keenan Allen as your second wide receiver in the stack, then we're going to go cheap at 500 in the stack there. If you want to go with Josh Kelly at the running back position to pair up with Herbert and Mike Williams, then we're going to be able to spend up a little bit and get to Derrick Henry 7,400. And Derrick Henry, last week the Chargers got ran on quite a bit by the Dolphins. Mostert actually had a pretty good game. And so I think Henry should be able to have a pretty good game as well. Obviously, there's a little bit of cause for concern with the Tajay Spears usage for Derrick Henry. They're on snaps, which is unusual for a Derrick Henry team, but we can just chalk that up to easing the big fella in week one, and hopefully he kind of gets back to a bigger workload here. And if that workload concerns from week one cause people to bring down the ownership on Henry, then we will definitely eat it up. So love this Chargers game environment. Love this Chargers offense here against the Titans. And I think basically it's just a decision on if you want to go two wide receivers or if you want to add in Josh Kelly. And I think, people ask, well, is it okay to pair a running back with, a receiver and a quarterback? Like what if the running back's taking the scores and stuff like that? In this specific condition, I don't think it's that big of a deal because Kelly's so cheap and because he's probably going to be the primary back, getting some receiving touches, getting some goal line work. And so this is more so a bet on the Chargers offense, just scoring a lot of points. And if you do choose the Kelly route, you just basically want Kelly, Herbert, and Mike Williams to account for all, most of the touchdowns. And then the flow chart's off to a good bang there. So if you go the Derrick Henry route, you'll have an option to include the Kansas City and Jacksonville game. And so I've got Travis Kelce in there at tight end at 7,600. And then you can include him with either Zay Jones or Christian Kirk. I do think Zay Jones will be a little bit more popular this week, 4,700. He's $400 cheaper than Kirk at 5,100. And, he got a touchdown and had a better week one. Kirk, on the other hand, has gotten some really negative buzz lately, but I could see him still doing well here against the Chiefs. This is another game that could be really high scoring, could be a lot of players scoring fantasy points. And so I don't just want to completely forget about Christian Kirk. And so I think both of these are pretty good options. Both of them provide great leverage off of Calvin Ridley as well at 7,200. So Ridley's going to be very popular. If Zay Jones or Christian Kirk do the touchdown scoring, then that's going to be a nice leverage play off of Ridley. And a lot of the teams will probably have Ridley and Kelce paired. And so if we can sneak in Zay Jones or Christian Kirk here and score some more points than Ridley, then we're really off to the races if Kelce has a big game. And then to finish off that path of the flow chart, that's the Joshua Kelly, Derrick Henry path. Then you add in Travis Kelce or Zay Jones, Christian Kirk. And then you'll get to pick between kind of, you've got a 4-pack of players here: Kenneth Walker, Jahan Dotson, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Rondale Moore. So, if you go Kenneth Walker, then you probably want to include Rondale Moore in order to make the money work, or you can kind of split the difference in the middle and go Dotson and Jackson Smith and Jigma. And so, yeah, I think that's, I just really like that Seattle-Detroit game, which I'll show later in the flow chart here, some other options to attack it. But I think Kenneth Walker could have a big day. I think JSN is due to have a breakout week one of these weeks. I'm not sure if it's going to be week 2, but I also don't want to miss it. And so whenever that happens, I'm sure the $4,500 price tag will look pretty small in comparison. And so might as well take a couple shots on JSN. The Commanders' wide receivers were all pretty similar in output last week, but I do think Jahan Watson is a pretty skilled guy, and I think 4,900 just seems a little bit too cheap for him. And then Rondale Moore, isn't the most awesome click to make, but he's got a decent ceiling at 4,000, and I think he's that game could have some high scoring to it if the Giants and Cardinals both kind of get into a little bit of a back and forth there. So some other options like in this range of call it high 4s, low 5s. I think obviously Puka Nacua, who we talked about in the cash game, but that's just kind of, you're just gonna have to be cognizant of your ownership here in GPPs. Nico Collins, I think, is a pretty good play as well for the Texans. And then Van Jefferson, I actually don't hate either as leverage off of, he was kind of the forgotten guy after Puka and Tutu last week both went off, and Van Jeff was pretty quiet. But we've seen Van Jefferson get a couple big games, a couple long bomb touchdowns. And so I think that could easily happen here, and he would be extremely good leverage off of the other popular Rams guys. So that kind of cleans up the top half here of the flow chart. I'm realizing here in my rush this morning to get everything going, I forgot to add in the defensive options for the flow chart. So we'll hit on those now. I really like the 2,700 to 2,900 range this week. And I actually really like the Jets defense. I think the focus in the building for the Jets this whole week is going to be relying on their defense to try to win against the Cowboys this week. And we saw how good the Jets defense was against the Bills. And I think they're kind of been slept on a little bit here at 2,700 against the Cowboys. Just because Rodgers is out doesn't mean the Jets defense is going to change too much. And then I like the Bears against the Buccaneers at 2,800. And then I like the Falcons against the Packers too at 2,900. Is Jordan Love, was that a flash in the pan, or is he the real deal? Kind of time will tell. But with the skill position players being so banged up on Green Bay, there's probably going to be a little bit of some potential for turnovers and things like that coming out of the Falcons. So those are kind of some of the options. I'll make sure to add this in on the flow chart here in the middle for the defensive options before it gets posted on the website. Okay, so circling back to the Keenan Allen and Treylon Burks route. So with Keenan Allen and Treylon Burks, then we've got to start fitting in some more running backs because we don't have any yet. And so I've got two different secondary stacks here that you can kind of target. And the first one is with Josh Jacobs and Gabe Davis. And so I think this is a really fun one because, the Raiders, so last week, 90% of the fantasy points for the Raiders came from Jacoby Myers, Devontae Adams, and Josh Jacobs. This week, there's no Jacoby Myers. And so obviously there's going to be maybe another guy or two that steps up, but I expect this offense to be super, super concentrated around Jacobs and Adams. And so I really love Jacobs here at 7,100. And then Gabe Davis, is exactly what we want from a GPP play, right? He's got some really dud weeks in his game log, which keeps the ownership off of him, keeps people from getting too popular. But then he's got some really big spike weeks and a couple touchdown games, things like that. And I think this Raiders secondary is not very good. And so Davis should be able to get up in a bit. Hopefully they try to feed the ball after some coach speak this week, talking about trying to get a second option going on offense. So that's a little secondary stack there with the Raiders and the Bills. And then the other game that I like that we touched on a little bit earlier is this Lions-Seahawks game. So pairing up Jahmyr Gibbs and Tyler Lockett here on this half, and that fits really well into the flow chart. And I really like the Jahmyr Gibbs angle because we've been hearing Dan Campbell talk this week about they want to get him some more touches. Obviously, he looked really explosive in week one and the opportunities they did get against the Chiefs. But then, he's also really great leverage off of what's probably going to be a pretty popular David Montgomery pick this week. And so if, Gibbs steals some of the work from Montgomery and ends up outscoring him, then you are probably laughing about 15 to 18 to 20% of the field in GPPs who played Montgomery. So that'll be a pretty good feeling. And in a game like this, which should have a lot of touchdowns, that stuff can happen pretty easily. And then Tyler Lockett, quieter week one. Seahawks in general disappointed in week one. And Lockett was in and out of the game. I think it was a head injury, potential concussion symptoms, stuff like that. I do think he ended up coming back into the game, so nothing to be worried about, but could easily see Geno Smith, spreading it out a little bit and chucking up some long balls to Lockett here in week two. So I think that combo of Gibbs and Lockett is just a really explosive GPP pocket there, and has the ability to capture a decent amount of points from that game just by those two guys alone. So I think that's a really fun angle. And then from there, you still are going to need another running back. And so because we saved a little bit of money with Treylon Burks, because we saved a little bit of money with Gabe Davis and Tyler Lockett, whichever one you pick there, we are going to be able to fit in some pretty good running backs here, either Travis Etienne or Joe Mixon, 6,900 for Etienne and 6,500 for Mixon. And then I've got the two tight end options on this half is Kylan Granson for the Colts and Luke Musgrave for the Packers. And those guys, Granson's 3,000 and Luke Musgrave's 3,200. And I think, it's kind of a fun flowchart because you get a little bit of both things, right? You can pay up for Travis Kelce and have a stud tight end, or you can pay down for Granson, Musgrave. You could probably fit like Chig into that mix. If you don't go the Bills route with Gabe Davis and Josh Jacobs, and you go Gibbs and Lockett instead, then you could choose either Knox or Kincaid as well. I'm not too dead set on really any of the guys here. Musgrave will obviously be pretty popular, but I do think he's got a pretty safe floor, and I think he's just kind of a stud in the making. But there's quite a bit of good options here down, in the low $3,000 range. Adam Troutman is another one who should get some more, maybe get some more opportunity here with Greg Dulcich going down in the Broncos. So yeah, kind of a cheap tight end grab bag there. If you're making 20 lineups, I wouldn't get dead set on Musgrave and Granson and all of them. I would try to switch it up a little bit and sprinkle in some of the different tight ends there. And then really like both Mixon and Etienne this week. Mixon didn't get pushed too much from either of his backups, Travion Williams, Chris Evans, Chase Brown, stuff like that. And so, hopefully the Bengals bounce back as a team here, have a little bit more of a competitive, approach against the Ravens, and have a little bit better effort there. And Mixon should be a big beneficiary, and 6,500 is probably just a little bit too cheap for him. And then Travis Etienne had a really great week one, a lot of great usage. Tank Bigsby didn't really do too much to steal much from him. And now they come and play the Chiefs, which a lot of people are thinking is a pretty high scoring environment. So you can really see like where the focus is this week. Like obviously like the Chargers offense, but then there's just some game environments that are sprinkled kind of throughout both pieces of the flow chart, right? The Chiefs, the Jaguars, trying to get a piece of that. The Raiders, Bills, trying to get a piece of that. The Lions, the Seahawks, trying to get a piece of that. I think it's a really fun week to make a lot of different combinations and to really just try to target some of those big scoring environments and hope a couple of them hit and you make the right plays. So I think that's going to wrap it up. I appreciate everyone for tuning in this early. I was expecting to have about 0 viewers this early in the morning. We will be back to our normal time next week and moving forward. Appreciate everybody work with me here. And then, obviously this will post to the SGPN podcast network, and I'll get the flowcharts up on the website here shortly as well. And I'll tweet out the link and everything like that once that is complete. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Good luck in week 2. Hope to see you at the top of the leaderboards.